Thanks to everybody for taking your Thursday night to join us to talk about our recycling project that Lanark and District initiated. We talked about it for a little while, and then last year took our first run at it. And Robert's going to share some of our knowledge and some of our lessons learned. Robert is a very valuable member of Lanark and District. He was on our summer tour for those of us who were in Perth a few years ago to join us for that. And Robert is not shy to try new things and is always looking for better ways to do things. And so he very ably stepped up and asked to help to lead this project with Jamie Fortune. And so Robert can sort of share with you what we were able to do, and if anyone else is looking to roll one of these out in their local or a combination of locals, then hopefully you can pick up some knowledge from him.
Thanks, Marty, and welcome to everyone tonight on World Environment Day. This year, one of the focuses is on ending plastic pollution. So there's certainly a lot can be done in that regard. As Marty mentioned, this project was a while in the making. We actually started about the start of COVID and interested back then because really there wasn't much being done. So that pile of tubing you happen to see on your screen right now, I'm hoping it's all being shared, is what we were looking to reduce, reuse, recycle, something in an environmentally friendly way. So now that's interesting. I'm not able to scroll down. Let me see. Oh, okay. Okay. As background to our project, as all of us producers would know, there is a useful lifetime to our tubing and our main line, somewhere between 10 to 15 years. For those of us who really like to stretch it as I do, I've got some main line at least that's probably a good 20 years and still performing well. But nevertheless, there's a lot of material that does reach the point where it's no longer useful, or it's got, in my case, too many patches from squirrel bites and everything else. It's not flexible in that something comes down, it breaks, or you've got lots of issues. So looking at Ontario only, there are hundreds of tons of recyclable plastic that's being replaced each year in our sugar bushes. And I think one of the driving factors for us was within Lanark and District Local, where we have a lot of maple syrup producers. We had a significant quantity of tubing and mainline that had been replaced, but was still being held on the farm and the sugar bush, sometimes taken back to a drive shed, and in many cases, just huge piles. So we were interested in seeing if we could do something about that. Okay, so our objectives in the project, we want to provide members of our local with an environmentally responsible means of disposing of old tubing and mainline. We didn't want to see it going into landfill. We definitely didn't want to see anyone trying to dispose of it by burning or other means. So we were looking to do something that was going to be responsible. And I think as stewards of the land, it's something that all maple syrup producers have a lot of interest in doing. We're also looking at an objective to promote the recycling of tubing and mainline into new and useful products. So the reuse side of things. And depending on your municipality, we want to reduce the cost of disposal. In my particular township, taking something to our local disposal site, there's fairly high tipping fees. So depending on where you are, it can be pretty expensive to get rid of it. And in our case, at least at that time, and even today, our municipality really wasn't recycling it. So to start off, we identified a work plan and had a lot of help from members in our local and volunteers. So some of the steps that we laid out in our work plan was first to identify a facility that could recycle our tubing. At that point in time, certainly was not a lot being done. There's more opportunities available now, but still far less than ideal. We need to develop criteria for the material that could be recycled. So not everything can. Funding, so identify sources for funding the pilot, because although setting it the plant doesn't cost, the plant doesn't charge for recycling, but getting it there does. And transportation is a big issue. It's a big cost. We needed to identify a central site for collection of materials. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, some of the challenges. Communicate with producers and estimate quantities. So as we started to look at that whole project and try to quantify how much was out there, how easy it would be to get it to a central collection site and get a good handle on quantities in terms of what we would need in terms of containers, cost of transportation, that kind of thing. Find a company capable of transporting material to the recycling plant. So when we're in early stages, I put out a lot of calls to different transport companies to see if we could find one that would be somewhat reasonable in price and could handle the requirements both from our end and also at the off end for unloading. And finally, the last part of the work plan was just to execute. So I'll just mention some of the challenges that we had. One of the ones was to find a facility that could recycle our mainline and tubing. So tubing, mainline, fittings can be made from a variety of materials, high density and low density, polyethylene, polypropylene, PET. I won't try to pronounce the last part of that. Nylon, polycarbonate, and there's probably a few other materials that have been used in the past. So getting a facility that actually could make good use of this plastic I contacted and looked into a number of places that said they were recycling. Finally did find one, but in order for plastics to be recycled efficiently and successfully, and in particular with maple tubing, you need to separate the materials. And that kind of leads down the road in terms of how useful it will be. If it can be separated into like compounds, then you can do mechanical recycling versus chemical recycling. Mechanical recycling is essentially just taking that plastic and reducing it, in most cases, to something like a pellet. But some types of plastic can't be recycled in that way, and they actually need to do a chemical recycling, which actually breaks down the polymers. Now, when you're doing that, you start losing some of the value in that plastic. Maple tubing is, for the most part, a lot of it is very high quality plastic material, which is pretty ideal for recycling into other products. So having looked around, our solution at least was Environic. It's a firm located in Quebec City. They had already been doing it in Quebec. So it was just a question of convincing them or getting their approval so that we could actually make use of that plant as well. And by the way, if anyone has questions along the way, feel free or hold them to the end, whatever is convenient. another challenge for us was funding and identifying the source of funding, because as we soon realized, with the volume of material we have and the bulky nature of it, so very bulky in volume relative to weight, transportation is a major cost in getting the material to recycling. And this Environic is actually down by Quebec City, so it's a long way from us. We needed to make sure that we could, great to say we're going to recycle, but we got to get it there, and it's got to be reasonable for the producer. For us, the solution, we were fortunate that our local county, Lanark County, had funding available for different projects. We submitted an application and made a proposal to Lanark County for funding, along with some other initiatives that our local was doing, and we were successful in getting funding from them. It wasn't sufficient to carry out the project, so we did have to dip into our own local funds that we've accumulated over the years from various activities, memberships, hosting previous summer tours, that kind of thing. So that's where the funding came, and I'll talk a little bit about the cost of that later. Okay, a collection of materials. So at least in our local, there's a lot of material out there, but collecting it is a bit of a challenge. One of the issues was trying to get it to one point in a relatively quick period, and fairly quickly realized that it's difficult to get, especially with farmers and their schedules, to get everyone to be able to deliver to a site on a given day. So we needed access to a collection site over an extended period of time. We also needed a site that had some supervision, in part to prevent vandalism, but also to make sure that what was coming in, we weren't also collecting garbage, because the requirements of the plant is when it gets there, it needs to be maple tubing and mainline in clean condition, not mixed with anything else, not mixed with other plastics. We needed a site that had good access for the transport company, and also for producers bringing it in on their trucks and trailers and whatever else. And the site also had needed room for suitable containers for collection, because it was going to be on site for a while. We were fortunate ultimately to get 2 different containers, and we were able to separate, at least initially, our main line and our tubing, and that made it a bit easier for the recycling company later on. Now, the solution we found was working with the Tay Valley Township to use their garage site. So it had some supervision, certainly during the week, there were staff there. It was not supervised on the weekend, except when myself and a couple of the other volunteers were there to supervise the material coming in. We were quite fortunate, I think. We didn't have any issues with either vandalism or collecting other garbage, but it certainly was a concern. We had looked early on about sites that had less supervision, and there certainly was a concern that it could just become a dumping ground. And also we wanted to make sure that we had some inspection of material coming in. So those were the issues we were kind of faced with, and we were very fortunate to have a township that was very open to it, very supportive of our initiative. Also fortunate that one of our members, his sugar bush is in that township. He had good liaison with the township. So Paul Smith, I don't think he's on our call tonight, but Paul and I attended one of the council meetings, made a presentation, and the township was completely on board and very, very supportive. After that, we worked with their manager of the site, who was also very helpful to us. Okay, another issue or challenge was identifying company to transport the materials to the recycling plant. I think I mentioned I had contacted a number of firms because we needed a truck that was either a bottom unloading type trailer or a dumping one because at the one thing to get it loaded, but you have to get it out of there once you get to the plant. So it needed to be capable of either roll off or dumping. It had to be cost effective. It goes without saying it's bulky and not that heavy, but very bulky. We needed to have on-site containers, so the transport company provided the basically roll-off boxes. We had two, so suitable containers and enough capacity for what we had expected. So when were making our list and contacting producers or them contacting us, getting estimates, we had a rough idea of how much material we might have. So we basically contracted for that. And of course, they had to have a license to operate in Quebec for shipping. So in our case, the solution was Grenville Iron and Metal. They're a firm out of Smith Falls, Perth area. They actually specialize in waste management, metal, but other types of waste as well. So they were quite a good fit. Ultimately, we had two on-site bins, which was later reloaded and put on a 40-foot tractor trailer that dumped. So that's how we got it down to the plant in Quebec. Communications. So I guess not maybe so much a challenge, but just a real need to make sure that when we were rolling out this project, that we had a clear description of the objectives and the requirements to all of the stakeholders, to our members, so that certainly communicating what type of material could be accepted, giving them ideas on how to get it to us, but also communications in terms of Lanark County were very supportive and gave us a grant to help offset some of the costs. And as I mentioned, Tay Valley Township were very, very supportive. So solution to communications was very frequent communications with our stakeholders, emails out, telephone calls. I mentioned submissions for the grant, which I had a little bit of input too, but our president and our communications consultant had a big part of that. And our presentation to the Tay Valley Council, but frequent communications, a lot of follow-up with users back and forth in terms of identifying how much tubing they had, when they might be able to bring it, how it was going to be packed. So communicate in order to make this project work. So a lot more than perhaps I anticipated or our team anticipated early on. And here you'll see the end result. On the left, that's one of the roll-off bins that we had, and that was the first day in May. So we started collecting in May and through June, and it would have been really nice to have been able to coordinate everyone to get it there on one day. It would have reduced the cost a bit in terms of rental of the containers and made it a bit easier. But on the other hand, we're all busy. It's challenging to get it there. So we started to build that, and over, I think we had maybe 4 official days that we had designated we'd be on site to receive material. But we also had I think about three or so more one-on-one collections where someone wanted to come, they couldn't make it on a scheduled collection date. So myself or one of our other volunteers, Mike Wheeler or Paul Smith, would meet them on site to just to coordinate and sometimes just to give them a hand to get this stuff unloaded. Um, I think once you've loaded it onto a trailer, you realize how difficult the unloading part becomes, and that's where also choosing the transport company was pretty critical. It's one thing to get it loaded, but when you try to take that off, it seems to be all entangled. So sometimes it took a bit of brute force. Uh, so that happens to be our past president, Jamie, Fortune, and myself, and everyone that showed up contributed in their own way to help get things done. So, what were the results of our project? Well, essentially, we had 15,000 plus pounds of plastic material, high quality plastic material diverted from landfill to recycled products. Good participation from our local. We had 20 plus local producers. Some of came multiple times with big loads. Others came with a small trailer, and we also had a couple maple producers from outside our local that participated. So we opened it up to anyone that could get it to us, and we were glad to receive it. We wanted a good full load. I think the other result was we've developed a process that could be applied to future provincial efforts in this way. So we've kind of worked out the steps. We know things that worked and didn't work. So to be improved on for sure, and perhaps there are new opportunities now. But I think we regard as success for our producers locally. We were able to get rid of these piles of tubing that I myself and others had stored, and stored maybe as a loose description of how it was stored, but piled up somewhere and maybe not good condition. So we were able to divest ourselves of that in a responsible way, and that became good base material for recycling. So from my perspective, at least, and I think for everyone who participated, we were quite happy with the result. Took longer than when we initially anticipated, but the final result, I think, is good. Now, support for the project I've mentioned before, but I just wanted to reemphasize this was pretty critical to our project. The support from Lanark County, the Tay Valley Township Council, their public works manager, volunteers I mentioned too, but there were more than that, but certainly Paul and Mike really stepped up to help us on this. And we succeeded, I think. So right now, having concluded that, and next steps, well, we're looking at how we may repeat that because already we're getting a lot of inquiries. Are we going to do it again this year? What's going to happen? So really the next steps for ourselves, our local and myself is starting to develop a plan to support recycling at a provincial level. I think I've started to build out a little bit of a plan, but some of the things that we need to consider is getting more representation and support from the actual suppliers and manufacturers of tubing, provincial support, both logistical and financial. Obviously, producers need to be involved in this process and kind of reevaluate the landscape right now to see are there other places that can recycle? There's more being done right now, but one of the challenges with maple tubing in order to make the really good use of the material is the separation. A lot of different materials, if it can be separated, and this where Environic came in. It's pretty intensive process to recycle plastic. When it gets down to the plant, they actually separate out materials, and by doing that, it makes it a much better raw material base to be recycled, and they get a higher value for it, which is part of the economic, makes it economically feasible for them and for us. So that's where we are. That's the experience that we've had. Um, so I would open it up to questions, comments.
Sure. I typed one, and yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that, Robert. I typed one as Phil was probably about typing one in as well. So just to get the ball rolling. So what was our project costs, Robert?
Okay, the final cost to get it down there, so it was a bit over $3,000. So we were fortunate we got a grant from Lanark County, which I think it was part of a bigger grant, but I think we had about 2,000 allocated, identified as part of that, and then we supplement with a bit over 1,000, so 3,000 plus GST, HST.
And that's purely the trucking cost. That was
That
really our only cost.
that was our only cost. We were fortunate. Grenville Iron Metal, they actually didn't charge us for the rental of the roll-off bins. So even though we had them for about 2 months, normally they had initially said, we'll give you like 2 weeks grace on them, but they didn't charge rental for that. They just charged for the transport. And a big part of the transport cost was fuel. So from when we started the project, back till last year when we did it, fuel cost had increased about $1,000 in that period. So that's a
Right.
big component, but that's what the cost was.
Okay. Question from Phil. Did you have to remove the fittings?
Uh, no, no, we didn't. Early on, when we started this project, there were various options, and the at that point in time, the plant that was accepting this material, they would actually, if you had removed all the fittings, they would actually pay you for the material when you got it there at a low rate. But they changed their equipment later on, and they changed their business model, so they do all the removal and separation. We didn't have to, which was a real blessing because anyone who's tried to take that apart, the transport becomes a nightmare because now you've got a lot of short pieces and it's a heck of a lot of work. So no, we didn't have to remove fittings. However, no metal, no gear clamps, all of that had to be removed. So that was kind of the caveat on that. And the other part was it had to be clean. It couldn't be dragged through the mud to get there.
Yeah, like any some of this the manifolds, the clamp on manifolds have got the locking screw. Those would have to be removed. We had a section of bush, I can say, for what we removed, where we literally just yanked it all out, wire and all. It was a section of bush that we were no longer able to tap. Didn't own it, and somebody decided they were going to do something else with it. So then we had to remove all the wire from it and the wire ties, which takes time. If it's just a simple replacement where you're taking out the 15-year-old main line and you're just rolling up your main line and throwing it into a pile, it was relatively easy, other than removing gear clamps. Or if you had
Yeah.
stainless insert fittings, those had to come out. I think anybody would want to take them out anyways because they're pretty freaking expensive. But poly fittings, if they were no longer good and they were starting to get worn, the poly fittings could stay in the tubing.
Yeah.
I just have a supplementary question. Was there any kind of incoming inspection at the plant? Like you mentioned it, Marty, it had to be clean, but clean can mean a lot of different things.
Robert, I believe they were quite happy with the quality of what they received at the other end.
Yeah, yes, they were. Our producers and everyone that brought to us were very, very good. So we got good, clean material. But yes, there is an inspection at the plant when it comes, and the real problem if you don't provide them good material is they will charge you. So if they receive material that's got wire and metal clamps and everything, it's like $350 a ton that you pay them to receive it. So when and that was part of although we didn't have a signed contract with them, it was very clearly set out that it had to be in good condition when it got there. So you don't have to wash the outside of it, but no metal. So yes, it is inspected when it comes in. We have to schedule a shipping date and receiving time. So that had to be coordinated with them, and they want to make sure that they're not inheriting a real problem. So yes, there was inspection at both our end and at the plant.
And the one thing, Phil and others, that Robert didn't touch on was we had two bins, one for Mainline and one for 5/16ths, or I guess 3/16ths lateral lines. So the material was already partly separated on our end.
Yeah, that's a good point. And for the plant, it facilitates their processing because they have when they're doing it, it's a lot easier for them if it's separated. So they were pretty happy. We had the two separate bins. It did get a little bit mixed when it was loaded into the tractor trailer, but still primarily it was separated out. So that was good.
And Robert did downplay how difficult it can be to unload that. When you're winding it up in the bush, you do nice hand coils, and then you throw it in the back of the truck and drive it to wherever you're going to pile it. And then it comes out of the truck and it gets a little messy, and then it sits in that pile with grass growing up through it for a year or two. And then you load it into your trailer to take it to the depot. And by the time you get to the depot, you can't tell one hand roll from another. It was I don't know if anybody else had a better method than just the electrical tape that we were using, but it certainly was a challenge to get it unloaded at the other end. So Brian's got a question here, Robert. Thanks for doing this. Question is, how many locals would be looking at perhaps to combine locals? I think this would be more of a sort of either if there were locals that were looking to join forces, or if there was something that we as OMSPA could do to facilitate at least on a regional basis. Some locals have more density of producers and more taps than others. And then Brian also says, I understand there's now a fee charged on new tubing purchases, but not sure how that is accessed. I believe I'll touch on the fee. I believe that is something that Quebec does. I don't know if Robert or John, you can correct me, but that's something that Quebec has done to encourage or to force, to encourage the suppliers, the manufacturers, to have full carriage of the life cycle, so that they are collecting essentially a deposit on new tubing sales that will help to offset the costs of recycling on the back end.
Yes, that's correct. And they're collecting that, and then some of that goes in Quebec. They've got regional collection sites. So obviously with the volume or whatever, so they have regional depots, and then some of that money being collected is used for transport to the recycling, so offsetting some of the costs.
Yeah. Yeah, and as far as sort of how can we scale this up? We did have talks about the right time of year to do it. After the season worked well for us in terms of our own sort of work plan. We talked about, do we do it at the summer tour? Well, I don't think everybody wants to be driving across the province with a trailer full of tubing behind them and the back of their truck full. Because I know I might have not been the safest load getting to the depot when I took my load in, or fall once we all get into the woods. Not all of us are yanking out the tubing that has to be replaced in May. When we did our collection, it was probably a buildup of material, as Robert has indicated, that had accumulated over many years. I know personally now that if we say, okay, we're going to do this every couple of years, that we'll make sure that we have it ready when we dictate it. If we can come up with a regular schedule that, as all the producers are are doing their replacements, that they can, okay, I know next June there's going to be a collection, and I'll make sure that any of the removals I have are out of the bush by that time. So certainly something that we want to look at in terms of how do we scale it up, acknowledging that the drive from our local to Quebec City is about as far as from some of the other locals to Lanark. So hopefully we can identify other locations and other recyclers, in other parts of the province that may be able to provide the same level of service as the recycling plant did in Quebec for us. Just a comment from Mark. Thanks for your effort. Hat goes off to it. Hat goes off to you, Robert. So thank you again for from Mark. It's considering it was a pilot project, considering it hadn't been done before in Ontario that we're aware of. I know I personally had taken quite a few loads to the dump over the years, and it always did break my heart a little bit to be disposing of something that I knew probably still had some value and some useful life. We've all probably known a local guy that wanted to get off of buckets, that was looking for some cheap or free tubing, that you give them a truckload and they're happier than a pig in shit to get some free tubing that they can reuse for putting up a little bit of pipeline in their own sort of growing woods. Of course, reusing is always preferable. Reducing and reusing are preferable to recycling, but certainly recycling being far preferable to just throwing it in landfill. So, Robert, a question for you: if you were going to do this again, or do this from scratch, what would you do different?
Not volunteer to lead the project. No, actually, it was fun. I think in terms of doing things differently, earlier on, I don't think I recognized the importance of having this central site where we could bring it in. So the first couple iterations, just trying to look at organizing around one particular day, and that really isn't feasible. So kind of learned that one of the real factors was having a central depot that could collect over a period of time. So yeah, I think we wasted a bit of time the first year or so and going down that path, and it really wasn't a good one. So other than that, it was a little bit trial and error, I guess. Maybe in terms of communications to producers and getting, a lot of people say I've got tubing to recycle, but then actually getting them to come to the table was hard. And I understand that you're a farmer and you've got a lot of other activities, and you're just glad to get out of the sugar bush and kind of forget it for 6 months. So maybe different type of engagement with producers at the right time of the year, perhaps. So I think there was some learning curve for sure about things that would do a little bit differently, but overall, I think the project did work out. Certainly the time required, though, was longer than initially anticipated. I thought we could do this all in a year, and recycling is hard. It's a lot of work, not easy. Certainly learned from what they're already doing in Quebec. That was good, and that was good. I learned a lot from them, and speaking with their plant manager about some of their initiatives again this year. So that was valuable. So I think just being connected with the producers, but also on the other end as well, and learning from other organizations what they're doing, because Quebec are leaders in this relative to us for sure. They've been doing it for a while.
And to me, and I'm not sure if we have any of our members that are also equipment suppliers on the call, but you're going to CDL or Dominion and Graham, or your local Lapierre dealer or whoever, quite frequently, through the year, and certainly at the start of the season, having a depot that where everybody is already congregating would be an ideal situation. And if they had space to accommodate a bin, well, you're coming to buy, some fittings and some containers, and hey, I got a truckload of old tubing that can go in the bin there too. That would be an ideal situation.
Yeah. I just see one comment, I guess, from Brian in regards to the depots in Quebec and whether or not we can take to Quebec depot. And at the moment, that's not possible. If you happen to have an affiliation with the Quebec producer and you kind of bring it to one of their locals under that guise, yes. But officially, they do not receive Ontario recycled material. I've been discussing with one producer who's right on the border. He's not that awful far. And he said he might be able to work with one of the suppliers down there to get it in through his van, but they're not partially because the cost of transport is subsidized from Quebec as well. So they're not anxious to take ours, but hopefully in the future we can get other sites here. And I should mention in Quebec too, they're looking at other options for the collection. Would it be possible to perhaps do some of that separation and shredding to get it down to something that would be easy to transport as opposed to bulk? They're not there yet. So maybe in the future that might be a possibility for us. I don't
Yeah,
know.
we did look into shredding as an option, Robert, and there's nothing that's really commercially viable. You can't just take your homeowner scale wood chipper and run your tubing through it and shred it.
Yep, big mess once it starts winding around the roller feed rollers.
Yeah.
And the mixing of the plastic, which then degrades the value of the plastic. So Quebec actually separate out the fittings and they get a much higher price for the recycled material because they have done that. So you if you just even if we could, you lose value by doing that. So one of
Yeah,
the challenges.
if you're using a system like the CDL spin seal, then that's all the same type of material, and then you don't have your black nylons or other clamp style fittings. It's all sort of uniform. Most of the producers that we're bringing in, Robert, the rolls of Mainline, were they bringing in rolls or were they bringing in like 6 foot chunks?
And pretty much all came in rolls.
Right.
Yeah, which was easier. Just the handling, once you start putting in shorter pieces and the plant kind of limit, nothing shorter than 4 feet. But all of ours came in virtually all came in rolls.
Sarah has shared a few photos here of some posts that she's made to local Facebook groups for gardeners, using them for greenhouses. That's a great idea. Um, Certainly, I think you would make exhaust the demand for that over time. But anytime that we can reuse materials such as that, that's a really good idea. And Brian also with an example of using some tubing for trickle irrigation systems. So, also a good idea and a good adaptive reuse for something that can give it a little more life before it does have to get to a recycling facility.
Yeah. The one thing I didn't mention is after it comes out of the recycling plant, they're selling that material in basically granules to extruders and other plants. It's going into things like drainage tubing, but also playground structures, that kind of thing. So it is getting a good second life, uh, which is great. Reused if you can, but it has to get recycled. It is going into good, useful products.
Okay. Any more questions from our participants?
Can you hear me, Marty?
I can, Terry. How are you?
Uh, Good. It's Terry Hoover over here. I want to congratulate you guys. You're being modest with the communication and legwork you had to do. I realize it was well over a ton of it. We did a project in Waterloo, Wellington. We were literally weeks away from launching, and that's when I got introduced to world politics. We uh, the Canadians arrested a Chinese girl in Vancouver on behalf of the states. Do you remember that?
No. Oh, that, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
literally 2 days later, our recycling program was canceled.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, because it was going to Quebec and then it was being sent to China. So that was a real blow. So we never did get it launched, and we've been needing this for years. And I congratulate you. And our idea at the time, it just like you hinted, is to have a dumpster at. We had two Lapierre dealers volunteer. So then when you went to the dealer to get your new tubing, you dropped off the old tubing at the same time. And I think that's the way to go. And then
I
that
think
way you
so.
just have to pick up a bunch of these dumpsters, at these various stops. But hats off to you guys for doing a fantastic job. And I just wish we lived a little closer to you. That's all.
Well, we are looking at expanding it and doing it again. And Robert and Robert and Jamie and Mike and Paul, they did all the heavy legwork on this, and so they really get the credit. They were the ones continuing to send out emails going, "Hey, we still need a few more truckloads." It did take a lot of time, and Emily's note, I see recycling is not done because it's easy; it's done because it's the right thing to do. So that's very much bang on. Those of you who are, on your local chapter as directors, we would love if you take this back to them and let them know what you've heard and what you've learned, and see if there's any appetite for doing it again. We are looking at in our local, are we able to do it again, and when, and how can we improve on what we've already done? So, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, or you can reach out to John or to Robert, and we will share what we know so that you can learn from our lessons learned, and benefit from that. And I think John, you had noted that you were going to put this up on our YouTube channel for anybody who may want to see it in the future.
Yeah, it'll take a couple days to get it up, but yes, I'll put it up there, and I'll make mention of it in the next e-letter as well.
All part of our training that Randall is so adamant about, that needs to be available to all of our members as a benefit. And there's a lot of really really smart, ambitious people like Robert and Jamie that we can benefit from their energy and what they've learned from this. So thanks everybody for joining us on a Thursday evening, and hope to see some of you in just over a month's time in Cornwall,
Summer tour. Here we
in
come.
our southeastern corner of the province.